Hey everybody, Ian here. I decided that I wanted to make a video for you guys and share something of the build process of my 67 Nova with you guys. I've learned quite a bit about working with round tubing and building the 4-point roll cage for this car, and I have decided that I want to elaborate a little bit on the roll cage for this car. So if you have a look right here, you can see that I've got this bar sitting right here. I'm going to call that a down bar, door bar, whatever you want to call it. I don't know, I'm not a professional at this, but anyways, it's just sitting in there right now being held in place by a magnet. And the reason that I've decided that I want to put one of these things in the car is because I've noticed that there must be a lot of flexing going on in the body of the car. If I go to shut the door on the car while it's sitting on its own tires, it shuts really nice and solid. My door gap and everything looks fantastic. But watch what happens if I come over here and I raise the car up. Make sure my pads are in place. Yeah, I'm looking good. Go ahead and raise it up for a second to where it's up off of its tires. There we go. So we are now off of the tires. The 2-post lift is suspending the car. Watch all of a sudden how the door just changes, you know, how it shuts. Hear that? Like a hard metal on metal connection there. So it's obvious that there's a lot of flexing that occurs when all of a sudden we are picking up where those 2-post arms are picking up versus, you know, actually sitting on the tires. And so anyways, I've determined that I want to put those door bars in the car. And since those things frankly are a lot more difficult to fabricate than what you might think, I just wanted to go ahead and make the other one for the opposite side of the car, show you my process and how I do this, and hopefully I can share a little bit about what I've learned, because frankly it's a lot. For those of you who are going to say, well, Ian, the bar doesn't really come very far forward, just right up to about the front of the seat right there, I would agree with that. I've decided not to carry it further, and the reason for that is, having owned old cars before, I know there's a good amount of time that you spend on your back, you know, working up under the dash doing this stuff right here, and if that door bar is right there in your back, it just takes the fun out of everything. So that's why I'm stopping that bar right there. Before I show you how I made that door bar and made it fit so nicely, I wanted to show you the bender that I'm using. This unit is made by JD Squared. I've had it for years, and we sell something very similar that's made by Woodward Fab, which I'll put a link below in the description to. I'll tell you in advance, the dies for these things are all of your expense. The bender is really not that much money, but all of those dies that you see, those things are expensive. You know, they require quite a bit of elbow grease, but these things work really well. The first thing that I want you to know about trying to use a tubing bender to make something for a roll cage, the very first thing that you have to do, and this is absolutely mandatory, is make yourself a template. Every time that I get a new die for my bender, the very first thing that I do is make a template. All of my templates come from a piece of steel that is 20 inches long. This one is 20 inches long. And if you have a look at it here, I've bent it to a 90. I've put a mark with a grinder right there showing that from here to here is 4 inches. And matter of fact, I engraved 4 inches to it right there. You can also see that I've put 20 inches right there as a reminder. So from here to the end is 4 inches, and the entire piece is 20 inches long. And so what I do is I take one of these things, I put it into my bender, I align that mark right there with the edge of my bender, and then I put a 90-degree bend into it. I even went as far as to write right on it right here. It says fully bent to second to last notch. And so what that does is it kind of lets me know that this is my template that I use going forward. So if I want to know how high it's going to be standing up in this direction or anything you can think of, you're ultimately going to use this for trying to figure out how you're actually going to make your part. You'll notice that, of course, on that piece there, it said that I went to the second to last notch. So basically what I'm trying to tell myself there is that as I'm using this thing and I am, let's pull that out of the way, I'm bending it, I'm going to here. So I now know that on that template over there, if I bend to right here, that's the amount of bend that I'm going to get. So I can measure that. Maybe I get 91, 92 degrees, whatever. But it allows me at the end of the day to then be able to go and do the exact same thing over again, knowing what I get when I go to that point on the bender. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so this is the part where we actually start using our template. You can see that I'm just holding it in place right there with a welding magnet. First thing I want you to know is understand that the distance from here to the start of our bend is not the same as from here to the start of our bend. That mark we talked about earlier is right over here on the back side of this tubing. You can't see it, so from here down to here is 4 inches. You want to make sure that when you're doing this type of stuff that you take that into consideration, that your template is not necessarily congruent. So what I'm going to do here is just try and get a rough idea for how long this thing should be. You see I got the magnet holding that in place right there, and I can see about 15 inches or so should get us from where we're trying to be to make this bar. So I know that my template right here is 20. If I add 15 to it, I'm at 35. So I'm going to make this thing 38 inches long, and that should ultimately give me a little bit of extra room that I can trim off of it if needed. I am going to come back in here and trim some of this material right here to kind of lower that bar later, because I don't want it to be really any higher than the seat on my car. So there you go. That's the first thing that I do as I use my template to determine that the entire piece needs to be about 38 inches long. This part is absolutely crucial. We are going to document what we do as we do it. So we've got that extra 18 inches added to our 20-inch template. So 38 inches long is what the piece is going to be. And as we go through this process, you'll understand what these additional notes are for so that we can ultimately replicate it and create 2 pieces that are identical. Alrighty, I have measured out a 38-inch section, and now we cut it. You certainly don't have to do this, but I like to dress my parts from day one just so I don't cut myself. Looking good. So check it out. We've got our 38-inch long piece here. I have put a mark on it at 4 inches. And you need to now understand that this 4 inches here is the same thing as this 4 inches on our template right here. Because at the end of the day, we're about to make that sort of the same thing as that. But in doing so, we're trying to monitor how much extra material is ultimately going to go off in that direction, so that we're using all of that right there to kind of add on to that. So everything is sort of kind of being mocked up using your template, and then we bend the actual part. All right, so here we are. We've got our workpiece into our tubing bender here, and we're about ready to make our first bend. Remember earlier how I was talking about our template being 4 inches from right there from the start of the die to the end of the tubing. So if I take my tape measure right there and I measure it, you can see we're at about, 4 inches from the start of the die to the end of the tubing. Pro tip that I want to share with you, a couple things here. Don't over tighten this jam bolt too much. You will deform your tubing and it won't be nice and round here on this end anymore. And also you can pull that bolt out you see right there and just sand the end of that bolt so it doesn't have any points to it or anything, and it's just a nice flat finish that will go a long way towards helping it keep from marring the tubing on the outside. And then one thing that I just noticed that I'll tell you not to do you notice how the weld seam of the tubing, you can see it right there, there's the weld seam. I've got it on the outside of the bend. Before I start this bend, I am going to spin that tubing so that the weld seam is on the inside. That weld seam doesn't like to stretch, and when it's on the outside of the tubing and you start going around in that die right there, it doesn't like to stretch the weld seam, and you can just split it right open. So I always make sure to have my weld seam on the inside of my bend. All right, you can see I've got my weld seam rotated on that thing. I want to show you something. I'm actually going to stop just a little shy of going to the full extension on this bending notch right here. The reason that I'm going to do that, if we come over and we have a look at the template that I made, I've secured it to the welding table, which is pretty dead-gum close to level at 0.3 degrees. If I take my little measuring tool, my little angle finder right there, you can see 93.8 degrees. So this thing is not actually a perfect 90. My template is not. It's about 4 degrees past 90. And so I'm using this information to try and help me to make the next bend and get it what I actually want. I do not recommend even attempting something like this without one of these little digital angle finders. Alrighty, let's make our bend. Okay, so here I am fixing to go to the second to last notch right here. I'm not gonna bring this bar all the way over to like a full pull here, because I found out on my template that's 94 degrees. So I'm gonna stop a little short of that and hope that I hit that 90. These things do come with kind of a Lord have mercy, I'm out of breath. They come with a measuring system where you take a little piece of like copper and align it to the gauge on these things. I've not found that stuff to be very helpful, because you have spring back in this stuff to where, you bend it to this and then you pull it out of the die and then it goes, boop, and opens up. So honestly, I just do it by feel. Okay, checking to see if I bent it to 90 degrees, nice and straight down my 90-degree tool right there, and then nice and straight down this side as well. Looks like I hit it for 90 degrees right out of the gate. Okay, so there's my part getting mocked up into the car. My part is 38 inches long. I have put a 90-degree bend at 4 inches, and now I'm going to trim 2.5 inches. Here's where the trimming comes in. So you can see that the bar sits up a little higher than the seat, which I don't like. And so what I'm going to do is cut 2.5 inches off of the bottom of it right here. Now, that 2.5 inches really serves 2 separate purposes. Number one, you're not going to get that bar into the tubing bender unless that material is there, because the bender, as you saw earlier, it clamps on to the end of the tubing. So if I had this cut too short from day one, it would never even have fit into the bender. And then of course the other reason that I've left that extra material there is so that I can trim it to fit and get exactly what I want. So I always recommend doing this, and on both ends of your part, leave too much extra material for yourself to cut off later. Since I'm anal retentive and everything has to be absolutely perfect, I'm using my red line welding table here to align my 2 parts right on top of each other and making sure, you can see my little mark in the tubing right there. So I'm going to cut it so that those 2 are absolutely positively exactly the same from side to side. Since my cuts are a little ugly on those 2.5-inch pieces that I cut off, you can see what I mean, they're not too pretty. I'm going to clean them up here on the belt sander, but not just that. If you'll have a look at that mark in the tubing right there, that's the clamping bolt in the JD squared tubing bender that kind of left an imperfection in the end of the tubing. So again, there's a third reason to have a little bit extra that you cut off. You're cutting off that little booger spot. There we go, not too bad. Kind of cleaned it up on the end. Went ahead and took the little flap wheel that you see right there to kind of remove the mill scale on the end of the tubing. Get a lot better weld when you do that. Here we are now getting ready to make our second bend in this piece of tubing. You'll notice that I have documented over here that we're putting a 45-degree bend at 17 inches. We're going to go to the second to last notch on our tubing bender. So I've got a mark right there for 17 inches. And this time I've changed the way that I'm measuring things. I'm now measuring from this end because frankly, measuring from here to anything down there is a little bit more difficult. And I just find it to be easier to measure from this nice straight end. And so I'm going to go in, I'm going to put that bend in right there to make the 2 pieces match. One of the things that I'll share with you that I wish I had actually done a little bit differently. Earlier we talked about how we put that weld seam on the inside of this bend. I think that was the right thing to do when you have this bend. However, when you then bend it in the opposite direction, that weld seam is now on the outside of the bend, which of course could ask for it to bust open. On this other piece that I made yesterday, not on video, you can see that my weld seam is right there on the neutral side of the bends, so it's not doing any shrinking or stretching. I think if I had to do this over again, that's how I would do it, and neither put it on the inside nor the outside of the bend. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I am not a professional. I'm just sharing what little I've learned. Folks, this part right here is important. Don't get this right and you will create a paperweight. So I'm getting ready to put my second bend into this thing, and I'm trying to make sure that I put this bend into it, and I do it so everything is in the same plane. The way that I accomplish that is, of course, with my little angle finder right here. You notice it says 0.9 degrees with the down right arrow. So if I move this over to my die, I'm at 1.6 degrees down right. Generally, as long as I'm within 1 degree, I'm happy, but it's very important that you make sure that that tubing is not leaning up or down. You want it in the same plane as the die, or you're going to end up with a 3D part when you don't want that. All right, I'm getting ready to make my final bend, and this is a good time to tell you something. I couldn't tell you the number of times that I've measured everything carefully, and if I had just taken the part that I was trying to replicate and laid it on top of the part that I was about to make, I would have realized that something in my measurement system was wrong. I've got in the habit in a situation like this where I'm fixing to put this bend into it, I'm just going to take the other part that I'm trying to replicate, lay it over at my bender, and just make sure that everything actually looks right. You know, you never know if you run off and you measured from this side of the die or that side of the die. This is your chance to hold the two parts up to each other and make sure everything looks good before you run off and create a paperweight. So, looks like we're good to go. I'm ready to make that bend. Here we go. Looks pretty good. Here we are. It is time to put our notch that you see in the first piece of tubing into the second piece of tubing. First thing you want to do is find out what your bend truly is. Looks like I pretty much hit 45 degrees on the money. So I'm going to set up my Woodward Fab tubing notcher. You can see on the little scale right there at 45 degrees. This is a super cool little notcher. Link in the description. Now it's time to go ahead and put my notch into my material. You'll notice that I have set up my notcher, and that's a bimetal blade right there to remove the absolute minimum amount of material. So I'm going to notch this, but I'm going to do it right there on the very end of the tubing. I'm doing that so I can then put it in the car and see whether or not I like it that length, or if I want to remove some more material and shorten it up. It's real easy to shorten up. It's a whole different story to make it longer. Next thing I want you to notice is that I just took a piece of sheet metal and I set it right there over the bend, and I did that so that I could take my angle gauge that says 0.4 degrees down right, which is of course on the notcher, and then set it over here on the material, and we're at 0.8 degrees, 0.9 degrees down right, so we're within like a half of a degree. That is what I'm doing to make sure that the notch that I'm about to put in the material lines up with the plane of this bend. Again, mandatory. Looks pretty good. This is a good time to show you something. Do you see on this piece right here, which I made off camera yesterday, that I have ground that edge to where it's now kind of a blunt edge? It's not sharp at all, whereas this piece that I just notched is completely raw and sharp. The reason that I ground this edge over here is not because I don't want to cut myself on that sharp edge. I do that so that it doesn't come to an infinitely sharp point, if you will, right here at the edge of the tubing, because as you start to weld that, if it comes to a real sharp point, then as you weld it and you hit it with heat, that material will pull away and it will retract, and basically what you'll find is that your workpiece is actually moving away from you while you're trying to weld it. But if you'll take one of those little flap wheels and come in there and clean up that edge and give it a dull edge, that material will stay right where you want it. As you're welding it, you'll get a better weld. So here we are. I've got the two bars just basically held in place in the car using some welding magnets, and this is my opportunity to make sure that they match side to side, that I'm happy with the look and feel of everything. This is your last opportunity to make sure of things like, does the seat interfere with the bar, or is there good clearance in there, which there is. Can I still get in and out of the back seat with this bar in place? I just had two epiphanies over here on the other side of the car right before welding this stuff in. I was looking at it and I was lining up this bar right here to be at 0 degrees, and I thought, wait a second, this car, Ian, is sitting on wheel cribs, and I thought, well, if the car's not level and I weld that in at 0, all of a sudden my rocker and my bar, whoops, let's turn that back on. My battery just ran out. But anyways, you know, at the end of the day, the car is sitting at 2 degrees down right. And so I'm going to want this bar at 2 degrees down right. That way it's level from, excuse me, it is parallel from here to here. The other epiphany I had was make sure to go ahead and install your seal plate right here, because it reaches around over that edge right there, and the last thing that you want to do is not have space in there, so had to put that seal plate into place. I will share with you that I'm using this little adjustable welding magnet by the folks at Yes Welder, and I absolutely love it. Super handy little device. I'll put a link down below in the description to their website. No, I am not sponsored, but I will send a link to this video to them, and if they want to send me a bunch of those magnets, I will be happy to use them on my channel. It just occurred to me to make sure that I can still close the doors with the bars in place. Can you imagine if you welded that bar in and had that epiphany after the fact? Oh my God. One of the things that I like to do with any bare steel part that I'm about to install in my car is to go ahead and media blast it. I've got an REPP70 media blast cabinet here at home, link in the description to that thing, and it's just something I've got in the habit of doing. If you know you're at some point going to be trying to prime this thing in the car, why not media blast it now? Check it out, looking good. The last two things to know about this job before I weld it in place. First, you'll see that I've taken a DA with like some 60 grit to the roll bar right there to get it down to bare metal, get rid of that mill scale so we get a nice clean weld. The other thing that I did is you'll notice that I have removed a circular section of the floor pan. I used a 2-inch hole saw right there, and I did that so that when I take that piece of 1 3/4 inch square tubing and I weld it in place, I'm going to be welding to the frame rail and not to that 18 gauge sheet that is actually sitting on top of it. Not just that, that hole right there is of course a byproduct of the drill bit on the end of the hole saw, and that hole is actually going to do us a favor because as the gases inside that bar expand while I'm welding it, they're going to be able to vent through that little hole right there, so that as I go to close up that, you know, maybe that weld up here, as I'm closing it up, it won't be trying all of that gas to expand through my weld and basically just push it all apart while I'm trying to seal it up. So that little hole is actually our friend. So I just put a couple of little tack welds on there with my TIG, and I just wanted to remind you of something. You're about to secure this bar into place and basically better define what that gap opening on that door is right there. If by some chance this thing was still supported by the lift, which it's not, you can see that arm moving, it's sitting on its tires. But if I were to weld those bars into place and not give consideration to how the car was loaded, this would be a terrible mistake. All right, I have welded the other side into the car, and time to go ahead and do the driver door bar here. Hope it goes well. This is a good time to point out that I like to do several tack welds in several different locations. If you just start off and you just run one great big bead when you don't have several tack welds holding everything together, when that great big initial weld cools, it'll draw your part and kind of, you know, move it to somewhere you don't want it to be. So I like to put several tack welds all over the place before I run a real bead. All right, I have finished installing the door bars, got them welded into place. I was decently happy with my MIG welds over here on this side. Passenger side didn't come out quite that good, but overall, pretty pleased with them. Really curious to see whether or not the car seems to be any stiffer when I go to shut the doors where it's being suspended by the lift. All right, $1 million question time. What do we got here? Huh. I'm gonna say it's better. It's not perfect. Let's check the other side. Let's see what we got over here. How does this door shut? It's still pretty rock hard, to be honest with you. Yeah, you can tell there's definitely some flex in the body, no doubt, even with those bars in place. So, I mean, I'm sure I improved the rigidity of the body, but, you know, probably not as much as I was hoping. Well, there you go. That is how the door bars turned out in the car. I'm really happy with how they look. Functionally, I'm not really sure if I added a whole bunch of rigidity to the car. You would think that it would have to. You know, I've got a lot of tinks and pops that I'm hearing inside of the car, which I suspect, you know, was the body of the car kind of contorting going down the road when I would hit certain bumps and things of that nature. So I'm really hopeful that those things help improve that issue. Hope you guys enjoyed this and learned something today. Appreciate y'all following along. Like, subscribe, comment below, all that good stuff. I'll answer your questions in the comments. Y'all be good. Thanks for watching.